wind howled across the lonely prairie, carrying with it the scent of freshly turned earth and the sharp tang of sorrow that clung to the land like an unseen weight. And there she was, a woman with trembling shoulders, her dress stained with dust, and her hands gripping the edge of 3 crude wooden crosses, planted side by side in the ground, each one marking a life taken too soon, each one a wound carved into her soul. And as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of fire and blood, her sobs rose and fell, shattering the silence in a way that no bullet ever could. And it was then that a cowboy on horseback crested the hill, his silhouette sharp against the horizon, his hat pulled low and his eyes steady with the calm of a man who had weathered storms both on the land and within his heart. And though he did not know her name, the sight of her grief struck him deeper than any gunshot, compelling him to dismount, boots crunching softly on dry soil as he approached. And she turned at the sound, her tear-streaked face pale with fear and desperation, clutching a small locket in her fist, as if it were the only anchor left in her shattered world. And he spoke in a voice as gentle as the hush before dawn, asking if she was alone, if there was anyone left. But her silence told him more than words could, her eyes flicking back to those graves, the graves of her father, her mother, and her little brother, all claimed by the fever that had swept mercilessly through their homestead, leaving her with nothing but echoes and emptiness. And though she tried to be strong, though she bit down on her lip to stop the quiver, the weight of her loss broke her again, and she whispered through trembling lips that she had no one, no family, no home, nothing but the ghosts that lingered in the air. And something in the cowboy stirred then, something fierce and unyielding, for he knew the sting of loneliness, knew the ache of burying kin and riding away with only the road for company, and he knelt beside her, his rough hand brushing the dirt from her fingers, as he told her she didn't have to face the night or the life ahead alone, not anymore, not while he still drew breath. And though she blinked in disbelief, though her voice cracked with doubt, asking why he would care for a stranger, his answer was simple, firm, and cut straight through the darkness. Because no one deserves to cry beside graves with no one to hear them. Because sometimes the good Lord puts a man where he's needed most. And right now he was here for her. That night he stayed by her side, building a fire near the grave so she wouldn't face the shadows by herself. And as the flames flickered against their weary faces, he shared stories of long trails, of cattle drives under endless stars, of battles fought and friends lost, and she listened, her tears drying slowly as warmth returned to her chest. And when morning came, he saddled his horse and offered his hand, not as a rescuer but as a partner in survival, promising her that together they could carve a new life out of the vast and wild land. And though her hand trembled as she placed it in his, the moment it touched his calloused palm, a spark of hope flickered to life inside her heart, a fragile ember she thought had died with those she buried. Days turned into weeks as he led her across the open plains, finding a small piece of land tucked near a river bend where wildflowers bloomed and the earth was rich. And there he began to build a home not just of wood and nails, but of laughter, of shared burdens, of quiet moments where her laughter slowly replaced her tears. And though the work was hard, though the nights were long, he never let her lift the weight alone. And for every board nailed, for every fence post planted, he reminded her that the future was no longer an empty trail but a road they'd walk side by side. And as time stretched on, neighbors came to know them as more than just survivors. They were builders of something unbreakable, 2 souls who turned grief into strength, who proved that love can rise even from the ashes of loss. And she, once the woman sobbing beside 3 graves, found herself standing on a porch he built with his bare hands, looking out at a horizon no longer filled with sorrow but with promise, knowing deep in her soul that she would never, ever be alone again. For the cowboy who found her broken had chosen to stand beside her, and together they had turned pain into a home. And to you, dear listener, if this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that even in the darkest valleys hope can ride in when you least expect it, I invite you to join our journey. Subscribe to this channel, because here every tale carries a spark of strength. Every story is a reminder that no matter how deep the loss, love and courage can rebuild the soul. And I promise you, the next story will move you just as powerfully as this one. The house they built together stood small but sturdy against the wide sweep of prairie, its walls smelling faintly of fresh-cut pine, its roof holding strong against the restless wind. And though it was nothing grand, to her it was a castle, because it was built not from wealth or fine stone, but from the steady rhythm of hammer and nail, from the sweat of his brow and the promise in his voice that she would never face the world's storms alone again. And yet even as laughter began to return to her lips, even as her hands grew steady planting seeds in the earth beside him, shadows of the past lingered in her heart. For grief is not a thing that vanishes quickly. It is a scar that aches when touched, and sometimes at night she would wake to the echo of fevered coughs, to the ghostly image of her family fading in front of her eyes. And she would sit by the window trembling, staring out into the dark, and that cowboy, faithful, watchful, would rise from his bedroll, sit beside her and wrap her in his arms, whispering that the past was behind them, that the graves they left behind would always be honored, but would never again define her, that her life was no longer bound to sorrow but tied to the hope they were building together. And slowly she began to believe him, began to let herself smile, not just because he was there, but because life still held beauty, worth fighting for. The days rolled into seasons, and the land blossomed beneath their care, fields of grain, bending golden under the sun, chickens clucking in the yard, a horse grazing by the fence, and for the first time since burying her family, she felt the joy of belonging, the joy of creating instead of losing, and neighbors began to come by, drawn not only to trade or share work, but to feel the warmth of that little home, for it seemed to carry a spirit stronger than timber, a spirit born of compassion and grit. And they often said the cowboy had changed since he met her, that the man who once rode alone with nothing but a rifle and a saddlebag now had laughter in his voice and purpose in his eyes, and he would only smile at such words, tipping his hat, because he knew it was she who had given him more than he had ever given her, she who had taught him that building a home takes more than a hammer. It takes trust, forgiveness, and courage to let love grow again after devastation. But life on the frontier was never without challenge, and soon hardship tested the foundation of what they had built. For one summer the rains refused to fall, the riverbed dried to cracked earth, and the crops withered beneath the unrelenting sun. And she, who had once survived hunger and sickness, felt fear clawing back into her chest, whispering that everything could be taken from her again. Yet the cowboy never faltered, working from dawn till dusk to haul water from miles away. His skin burned raw, his back bent with strain, yet his eyes always steady. And when she wept that the land might fail them, he wiped her tears with dusty hands and said no land, no drought, no storm could tear apart what they had built inside these walls. Because a home is not measured by the crop or the herd, but by the hearts within it. And those hearts were strong enough to endure. And so they endured together. And though their harvest was meager, though their table was simple, every meal they shared was rich with gratitude. And in those lean months she realized that home was not the house, not the fields, not even the food. It was the sound of his boots at the door, the weight of his arm around her shoulder, the peace of knowing she was no longer alone in this vast and unforgiving world. Then came another trial, one darker than drought. For men rode in from the hills, one evening, hard-eyed, strangers with greed in their hearts, demanding the land, demanding she leave, mocking her as a widow's daughter who had no right to claim soil or sky. And for a moment terror threatened to choke her. But the cowboy stepped forward, tall and unyielding, his hand resting calm on the butt of his revolver, his voice steady as he told them this was their land, their home, and no man had the right to take it from them. And though the strangers sneered, though the air grew thick with the promise of violence, something in his stance, in his steady gaze, broke their resolve, and they turned their horses, muttering curses as they disappeared into the dark. And she, shaken but safe, clung to him, realizing then that he was not just her partner, but her shield, not just her builder, but her defender. And in that moment the scars of her past seemed to fade just a little more, replaced by the fierce certainty that with him she would never again be abandoned, never again be left to face graves alone. Years would pass, each one weaving them tighter together, each trial and triumph making their bond unbreakable, and their little house would grow, not in grandeur but in love, with children's laughter eventually filling its rooms, with friends gathered around the hearth, with songs sung on summer nights when the stars burned bright above, and always, always at the center of it all, the cowboy and the woman he found weeping in sorrow but who now laughed in joy. Their story proof that even the deepest grief can give way to the brightest dawn, that no matter how broken the heart, it can be mended when love takes root. And to you listening now, Let their journey remind you that you, too, are never truly alone, that even in your darkest nights hope may ride toward you in the most unexpected form. And if this story has touched you, if it has sparked that ember of courage in your own soul, then I ask you to join this growing family. Subscribe to the channel, because each tale we share is a lantern in the night. Each story a reminder that love, faith, and resilience can build a home stronger than sorrow. And I promise you, more stories of courage and hope are yet to come. Stories that may be the very spark you need to rise again.